Typically, these are led by an executive coach and with groups that are between 4 and 8 people. 6 is usually that magic number, and it allows for a coach to drive out insights, but also for your peers to contribute and give you the opportunity to hear peer feedback and peer insights on that common theme and shared goal as well. So to have this conversation on career pivots, we have the best that we could have for this conversation, the king of the pivot. The king of the pivot. So TJ Adeshola is a dear friend, but also someone I deeply admire and respect. I first met TJ in 2008, a long, long time ago. We were green interns at ESPN, figuring out how to make it in that sports giant. And since then, I've seen his life and career transform in so many ways, have global impact and reach through companies like ESPN and also brands like Twitter. And most recently at Arctos Partners, which is another really, really major force in many worlds, but particularly in sports. And so, TJ, I want to just open up the question for you, and then we'll hear from those who are around us. Tell me what first comes to mind when you think about career pivots, and then we'll hear from everyone else and dive in a little bit deeper with you.
First of all, thank you for having me. We've come a long way since 2008, my friend. So when I think about pivoting, I think about making an adjustment in order to progress, making an adjustment in order to better position yourself. So for me, oftentimes I think we think of pivoting professionally when we've reached a point of frustration or unfortunately when there may have been attrition at the job. So it's one of those things that I remember when I led a broader team, it was always important for me to proactively have the team thinking about what a professional or career pivot looks like. We were just talking about it upstairs, so I'm excited to dive into this conversation a bit deeper.
Thank you so much. Now, each of you, briefly, just tell us your name, who you are, but also a word or a short phrase that expresses what comes to mind for you when you think of the theme of career pivots.
Stacy Spikes. I'm the co-founder of MoviePass and also the founder of Urban World Film Festival. And when I think of this, I don't know anybody who doesn't have multiple hustles going on. And I think of it going from your left foot to your right foot at times, where it's not so much a leaving this career and that career, but your side hustle becomes your main hustle. And things kind of move around. So that's what came to mind for me.
Hi, I'm Amber Leon, professionally known as Glam. And when I think of pivot, the first thing that came to mind when she asked was surrender. That for me, I mean, because and I didn't say, well, I'm a image consultant and creative consultant. And I will say within that, I have had to pivot quite often. But the thing that always got me through and let me know that I'm always exactly where I'm supposed to be has been the fact that I have surrendered completely to the divine and to the divine and intervention and to being always exactly on time. So for me, that's it in a nutshell.
I'm Dabo Che, the CEO of Che Creative, full service ad agency. For me, the idea of pivoting is an opportunity to get closer to your purpose. I think we all kind of are inching along to a center. And so for me, it's really that step closer to where you're supposed to be. It might not be a comfortable space. It might not be something that you anticipated. But kind of what you're talking about, surrendering to the real force that's moving you. It's being open to that and understanding that this is an opportunity to get closer to your purpose is what best comes to mind for me.
Hello, I'm Gabrielle Chardin, the founder of Kitchen Table. When I think of pivot, when I at least think about the pivot I've had in my life from, filling seats at other tables to building my own, I think the most powerful thing about a pivot sometimes can be when you're not running from something, but running towards something. Because oftentimes pivots come out of a necessity or a fear, but it's actually, there's an optimistic view when you're actually running towards something. Which perhaps is a privilege, but I think figuring out whether it's like, fear or focus is the beautiful thing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Pinto. I'm a senior marketing manager at Google. And when I think about pivoting, the word that comes to mind is really growth mindset. It's, for me, trying to find the opportunity in growth, even if you do feel stretched, even if it does feel uncomfortable, but pivoting. And I think the other piece of that is recognizing that we are multifaceted, and sometimes you're pivoting not in a linear way, but really it might be, fulfilling a personal passion, not necessarily professionally. And so I think we allow ourselves to pivot based on what we find fulfillment in and what we are identifying as growth.
You said what I was gonna. I'm Anthony Akinbola. I'm a visual artist based in New York, and I think to that point, as a person living in the city, inspired by a lot of things, you kind of want to go after everything. You have to have a lot of side hustles, and I think there is you can be comfortable in your industry and also be like, hey, I really want to explore this stuff. And there's life's short. So it's kind of try and do as much as you can do, really.
Thank you for that. Lisa, did you want to share?
For Mike.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say you are actually sitting in a pivot, right? And this came up earlier from our conversations. We started out to bring culture mix, and we were supposed to be on the beach, and now we're here. So the magic of pivoting. But when I think of the word pivot, I think that's been my entire life. And actually, I started seeing a therapist about a year ago, and a coach as well. And I went to her and I said, you think I have ADHD? Because I got all these ideas in my mind, and I'm always executing. I have a full-time job. I have my consulting company, and then I'm doing this culture mix thing. And I was like, wait. It's, and I'm pivoting from moment to moment between all those things, juggling all those balls. And, it's just became my word. I mean, subconsciously sometimes also when I think of pivot, I think of COVID. But it's just a word that's became my word of the year. So I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you so much. And learning, to Amber's point also, learning to surrender in the moment and roll with the punches, because when you have a vision and things are just coming up, fires and moments that you just have to pivot, you just have to really learn to surrender all of the time. But that's all I'm going to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. What comes to mind for me when I think about pivot is transferable skills. And how do I use everything that I've gained in my experience? Because you're never walking in with nothing. So how do I use what I've gained so far and translate that to the next thing? What can I transfer so I'm not starting at zero again? Thank you all for sharing what comes to mind for you. A good range, and glad that we're all in that moment of thinking about it. Now, TJ, tell me, what was your first career pivot? So think back. What did you lose, if anything? And what did you gain from that experience?
Yeah, great question. My first, I would say, significant career pivot was from Disney, ESPN, where we worked out together, to Twitter. And that was significant because you feel this confidence in working at a sports company and understanding how to work cross-functionally, knowing who the key players are, understanding who to go to get things done. And then when you pivot to a new company, first of all, there's that newness, there's that first day of school kind of dynamic that you feel. But then it's like, oh, I'm in tech and I don't understand this language that they're speaking. One, two, these people look very different than me. And being in New York and then going to the Bay Area, I felt a lot of different changes that I wasn't accustomed to. And then imposter syndrome started to rear its head. When you're hearing acronyms in the meeting and you don't, like, do I raise my hand to ask what the acronym means? Or do I just write it down and look it up afterwards, right? Those moments that each of us have experienced throughout the courses of our career where you're like, I know I got the sauce. I know I'm talented. I know I'm skillful, but I don't understand this. And there tends to be a moment there where you're still figuring it out and understanding that everybody experiences that. And while you're figuring it out, you will figure it out. But there is something to appreciate in that process. So for me, to be a bit more concise, pivoting from sports to tech and then starting to chart out my own path at the intersection of sports and tech was the first time I would think about that pivot.
Thank you for that. So tell me then, you went from a traditional media company, you had employee stock plan, you had your quality 401k, to, at the time, Twitter hadn't IPO'd yet. It wasn't public, and it was a big risk in that. Tech was a lot of risks for a lot of folks, especially in those early days. So what gave you the confidence to do that? And then I want to go back into, what did you feel like you were losing when you were in that moment? And what did you ultimately learn that you were going to gain?
Yeah, I'll start with the second question. I felt like I was losing safety. I felt like I was losing security because we were stepping from a company that was super reputable, that was Fortune 500, and there was a significant amount of pride in that too. I remember being like young and trying to get into a club and flashing an ESPN business card. You know what I'm saying? You know I work for ESPN, right? You want tickets? Like, that's, I'm sure. And it became, I started to tether my identity to the fact that I worked at this company that I was a fan of my entire life. So I lost that, and that felt different. Like, you don't work at ESPN? My mom was like, why are you leaving ESPN to go to this place? So even like within my immediate circle, there was uncertainty in the decision. But what I felt compelled by was the fact that the culture was using this new tool, not just Twitter, but tech, in really interesting and dynamic and thoughtful ways. And I started to see it become ubiquitous. You're watching television and you're hearing about tweets and social media. You're listening to radio, and segments are being built off of what is occurring on digital and social media. So I recognized that it was a utility that had staying power, and I assumed that if I made the bet, there was a long-term payoff. And then, like, when you Google like tech salaries versus media salaries, wait a minute, I might come up a little bit. And I'll never forget, when I started at ESPN, you probably made more than me. This was in 2008. My base salary is $27,000 in 2008. Yeah, see. Oh, easy. It was awkward. She was acting like it too. And then when I pivoted to Twitter, I immediately had a base salary of six figures. And my life changed. In retrospect, it's funny how, like, you had these things. I'm gonna make six figures one day. But in any case, I remember seeing that delta and feeling like I had accomplished something, and that in and of itself was enough for me to be like, you know what, I'm cool with ESPN if I can get this equity and all the things associated with that.
I'm really I'm really glad that you brought that piece up because that's part of what I wanted to focus on in the career pivot today. So sometimes we do have to take a step behind the scenes to get to that greater goal and in some cases financial gain that we may be seeking. So you left ESPN in the heat of Monday Night Football era, in the time where it opened up doors into all of the sports bars. You were also in Bristol for a time, so you were having the relationships with the anchors and everyone who really was all the producers. And then your role, that first role, because when you left Twitter, you were very, very public. You had just gotten 40 Under 40 with Sports Business Journal. You had many accolades. But when you left and first started at Twitter, that wasn't the case. People didn't really know what you were doing. So internally, what did that feel like for you to go from something that many people easily understood and that was highly visible to taking a step back where now you're actually financially in a better place, but most people don't understand or know, and that visibility goes away? How did you negotiate that with yourself?
The toughest part was explaining that to my mother. And once I got over that, I'm like, all right, this might actually make sense. But in all seriousness, it fueled me to ensure that what I was working on, whether my specific scope or the company, was something that did become familiar with my immediate circle, with my friends and partners that I worked at. So I routinely told myself, all right, like, how do I create a scope, whether it's within my existing remit or a remit that I add to that touches the culture? How do I create scope that allows me to partner with people at ESPN, whether it's by way of a business resource group or an ERG? So I became really intentional about using my platform at this new company to bridge a gap that existed from the previous company, right? So a lot of it was actually done through employee resource groups, and starting to like educate my friends and professionally colleagues that I had about the opportunities that existed with social media, but to just really feel confident in the fact that I had the ability to provide sauce to something that nobody really knew of beyond the power users.
And in this era, because while this is all happening, this is also when other social platforms like Instagram are taking off. We're really seeing more and more people share, and I call it announcement culture, right? People want to see you drop the next launch or have that next announcement, and that's how you feel like you're making it. How did you internally know you were making it for yourself before other people knew?
Yeah, this was occurring in parallel with this dynamic that you're communicating, and I honestly, it probably started like with our contingent, where nothing felt real unless there was an Instagram post or a tweet about it. So at the time, I don't know if that culture quite existed early on, but I recall midway through when Twitter IPO'd and when there started to be energy around the company, I recall feeling like, all right, like this is a really good space. However, there's still work to be done. So I never quite, it's a really good question. I never quite felt any type of insecurity in that, because the value that I was providing to the company, the people who looked at me at the company, was so important to me that that wasn't really a consideration. And what ended up happening was, as a result of business resource groups, as a result of hiring people who looked like me, a halo effect started to kind of organically occur. So there was never really a moment where I felt like I had to keep up with the Joneses or the flex on the timeline. The work kind of spoke for itself. And it's one of the things I hold the most pride in. And I mean, having conversations with folks like yourselves, with friends who started in corporate, were like, you know what, I have something in my spirit that I want to create. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Those kind of conversations kept me honest as well, because I drew fuel from you and watching your progress, and as well as others who were charting down the entrepreneurial path in parallel.
Thank you for that. Well, by the time you had reached your most recent pivot, again, there was no news article, particularly in sports, or no news team that didn't know the name TJ Adeshola. Very, very prominent in the sports space. And I love what folks brought up, where for some of us, pivots has come from a feeling of tension, or that we're running from something. And for others of us, it's come from running to something and having a lot of options. You mentioned that as well. So tell me a little bit about what it was like to have that most recent pivot. And similar, I think it sounds to me that there's a parallel between what happened when you left Disney to move to Twitter, in that everyone knew ESPN, everyone clearly understood what you were doing, and now you've moved into something else that people are still beginning to understand. So what was that like, to make a pivot when you were a key leader in your company and beginning to be a name, I won't say household name, but, a name in your industry, name in many professional spaces. And now you're still doing exceptional work, but less people know the name Arctos Partners. How has that transition been for you?
Yeah, so there was and you know this, I think a month ago, a friend of ours, Prentice, dropped a documentary on Black Twitter, and I was blessed enough to be in it, and I hadn't quite thought about the exit and the volatility of the past year until I watched it, and it forced me to revisit a lot of feelings that I kind of buried under a rock. But for me, the pivot was it was a bit chaotic, because I knew a pivot was nigh. You just kind of feel it, but I didn't anticipate it to be a function of an acquisition or something that was out of my control. So for those of you who know, Twitter was acquired by Elon Musk in Q4 of 2022. And that acquisition was met with a lot of hope from some people. It was met with a lot of resistance from other people. And then it was met with a lot of wait and see. And I probably fell within all three of those buckets. But the first day, we're talking amongst family, Elon fired my boss very publicly. And that meant that I reported directly into him. And that was quite an experience. But what I learned was what I had built. I was at Twitter for 10 years, which is crazy to think of. What I had worked so hard to build was very different than what he was looking to build. So much so that he changed the name of the company, right? So, worked directly with him for 6 months. And early on, my mom called me. It was the day after Christmas. I brought up my mother 3 times. Jeez.
Shout out to you,
Shout
Mama.
out to moms. And she said, can I have an honest conversation with you? I said, of course. She said, you're not yourself. I said, what do you mean by that? She said, you don't seem happy. You seem stressed out. And you don't look people in the eye. Like you're on your phone all the time. And, when your family tells you that you're not the same person, you're not showing up the same way they're accustomed to you showing up, that hits a little differently. So at that moment, I was like, all right, I have to resign. So I just had to understand what the right timing was. And even amidst the acquisition, because it was so chaotic, we've all seen acquisitions. We've all seen attrition, particularly in the tech industry. But the manner with which that happened, it was on the news everywhere, and friends who I'd worked with for 8, 9, 10 years lost their jobs in really, really nasty ways, quite honestly. So then I felt a little bit of survivor's guilt too, because Elon took a liking to me. Meanwhile, there were people who I'd worked with for years who got fired on the spot, including my boss. So I was dealing with survivor's guilt. I was dealing with this responsibility I felt like I had to protect people of color, like women who were on the brink of being of maternity leave, people who needed health care for chemotherapy. There were a lot of like really deep and heavy things occurring. So, you juxtapose the survivor's guilt with the responsibility to take care of your people with the, oh shit, I'm being an asshole to the people I care about most. The people I cared about the most, I was giving the least. And the company that cared about me the least, I was giving the most. And I realized that ratio needed to be inverted. So I resigned. We talked about this upstairs. I stayed on a bit longer. But my resignation wasn't a pivot toward something, as you mentioned. It was a pivot away from chaos. And it was so much chaos that I wasn't even considering what I was going to do on the other side of that, other than sit my ass down and just detox from a considerably toxic situation. So that's not a thing that I would have predicted. I would have predicted that my pivot would have been a function of me running towards something or identifying something that I was passionate about, as opposed to it being a pivot away from something that was actually impacting me in a negative way. So fortunately, when I did announce my resignation, I mean, there's so many folks across the sports industry, the media industry, the tech industry that reached out with opportunities. So I would say after about 3 to 6 months of detoxing, traveling, a little soft lifing, I had the opportunity to hone in on something that felt like an elevated step. So I pivoted toward a move in sports ownership and private equity.
Yeah, and it is such an elevated step. Can you just talk briefly a little bit about some of the work that you do? And then after that, you had other roles and opportunities that came up, book deals, a lot of front-facing roles. What made you make this choice? So tell us a little bit about the work, and then tell us what brought you to this choice versus some of the other things that might have been very high visibility and very high titles that might have been younger. You might have said, I want that.
Salacious is a good word.
Salacious, yeah.
I'll start with the second question again. I was tired, man. I was tired, and I felt like I had carried a lot of responsibility. We've all felt othered at work before, and sometimes being othered comes with interesting opportunity, if that's how I want to position it, such as I was one of a handful of Black leaders at the company, but I was working on sports and I was outside, you know what I'm saying? So part of it was like, hey, TJ, can you do this? Can TJ do this? Can TJ do this? And while it actually resulted in a lot of positive, like personal brand building moments, it also was heavy because the more I showed up as TJ at Twitter, the more my identity became tethered to TJ at Twitter. People would save my number as TJ Twitter, right? So that, I think, I underestimated the weight and the weight of being so like linked with a company that was just a company, So I felt really, really strongly that the next move would be something that would allow me to just sit, learn, build, and not feel the responsibility of having to be the face of culture, the face of Black people, the face of energy and motion and cool. So I was very, very eager to find something that would just allow me to learn and allow me to develop and sharpen different tools. So the first question was about what
My impact, yes.
For sure. And your first question is what my role looks like. So for the last 2 years while I was at Twitter, I was on the advisory board of this sports private equity company, and they reached out to me to be a subject matter expert on all things digital, fan engagement, social media. So as I transitioned off Arctos to provide a bit of guidance around the company. Arctos is a private equity firm that purchases significant stakes in sports teams, right? So Golden State Warriors, Los Angeles Dodgers, Boston Red Sox, 25 massive sports teams that sit at the intersection of sports, media, and culture. They brought me on to sit as an in-house advisory consultant to advise our teams on how to think through digital marketing, fan engagement, how to monetize and commercialize their social efforts, how to think through what breakthrough campaigns looks like, how to think through what cultural relevance looks like. Oftentimes these teams are under-resourced and are overworked. So having a subject matter expert that sits at a firm that's intended to add value to them is something that they're really, really keen on. So I get to work with some of the best teams in sports and help them think through how to leverage digital as a tool for innovation and disruption. It's pretty fun.
That sounds really fun and exciting. I want to turn it back to our group and give you all just a second to have a moment for reflection. So I'll give you all about 30, 60 seconds. And I want you to think about the last time you thought about taking a pivot. For some of us, it was really recent. For some of us, we might be a ways away from thinking about that next pivot. But think back to the last one you had. And I want you to think about what we just heard from about TJ. What did you gain from that experience? Was there anything you felt like you really discovered about yourself in that process? So just give yourself about 60 seconds, and then we'll hear from some of you.
Angelina, I want to add one more thing. As I heard you pose that question, one thing that I knew I learned, particularly when I stepped away from Twitter, was what I thought was safe and secure. My definition of professional safety and security was incorrect for me, at least, because what I thought was safe and secure was showing up and scanning my badge, going to this corporate job every day. And then I looked across the industry, particularly in tech, close friends that were super talented at Amazon, at Netflix, at Disney, were all losing their jobs. And this attrition was not performance related either. It was capitalistic. So we all grow up, go to school, get you a good job, and the rest will fall into place. But I place this false sense of security and safety in scanning a badge every day, when the reality is I could find that safety and security in being an entrepreneur. And that required me to have a look in the mirror moment.
Okay. Oh, sorry. So I'm going to say, again, I can't stress my pivot enough, but my pivot is still pivoting. And so next year we're going to be on that beach, and, would love for all of you to be part of that journey and pivot with me, and let your next pivot be my pivot. That's it. Thanks.
So, hi, everyone. I'm a small enough group. I'll introduce myself. I'm Andrea Wade, and look forward to meeting everyone. I know I'm dipping in a little late, and I feel like it was I don't know, divine intervention or something that I am here, literally, and that we're talking about this idea of pivots, because recently what I've been focused on, and that's some of you are part of the WhatsApp group, and I put in there, it was literally what I'm doing now is focused on helping people to pivot. So and literally because of everything you're mentioning, TJ, and something I've known and I've kind of call myself the queen of the pivot, and I've done throughout years of my career, is that we build skill sets, but then yet somehow we put ourselves or let other people put us in a box. When in reality, when you have skills and experience, you can leverage those in different ways. But it's not something that we necessarily know how to do or that we allow ourselves to do. Particularly, we're looking for what we deem as safety or comfort. And so my mission is to help people recognize that power. And so whatever your path is, you can carve it out. Like you have built, your portfolio of skills, and all you need if you want to go from A to B is to figure out what your path is or who your ambassador is or what the bridge is so you can get there. And that's, so I'm doing that with individuals, but I'm also doing it with companies because like we say, we're seeing all of these changes now, and it's a matter of like their strategies need to pivot if they want to engage authentically and everything. So, very, very timely, that would be a theme here. So look forward to hearing about everyone else's pivot and if I can be helpful. So
I have this mic in my hand, so I'll use it. One, so good. Thank y'all. And TJ, I'll take your cue and quote my mother as well. And she always taught me growing up to position yourself so you have choices. And I realized later in my life after a pivot or two that I don't work as hard as I do for the money. I work as hard as I do for the freedom. And that freedom is the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want, with whomever I want. So if New York closed down tomorrow, I can leave. If I felt in a toxic situation, we can leave. And so I think pivoting is a necessity in life. I mean, Jay-Z says people look at me strange saying I changed, like I work this hard to stay the same. And I don't think that is excellent for anyone. So anyway, I love the idea of working hard for freedom. So that way, whenever we do want to pivot, we can in whatever way that means. So I that's what I got to say.
and then Mike.
I resonate with that a lot because, I'm an artist, and it's by chance that I happen to be here during this festival that I'd never heard about this before at all, but I studied communications, and I actually thought I would have gone into advertising and marketing, so looking for those kind of jobs while I lived in New York. And a lot of my creative energy came from branding and trying to find solutions. But with art, it can kind of just be speculative, like it doesn't really have to solve anything. And I found freedom in being able to create in that space. But like you said, I also feel like I can do it well. I feel like I can make a good campaign. So some of the pivot, that's why I stayed for this talk. Like I was going to leave, and then I was like, oh, pivots, like trying to get into this. And what I've noticed a lot, especially in the fine art space, is that there are a lot of brands and companies that want to collaborate with artists. And I kind of find myself in this position where I'm like, well, I know I have some of this information, even though I don't have the experience of working in marketing. I also know that I'm an artist. How can I stand in that gap and like maybe take control or a director role and being able to kind of like create what that narrative is versus maybe somebody from a brand like pitching the creative thing for me. And in the talk earlier, it was mentioned that, as artists, you do bring something that's a little different from what you might just get in the industry, because it is like there's an X factor, I guess, in being an artist. So for me, the idea of like pivoting really, it's been in my mind, but I think this really inspired it. Like just being at this talk, hearing you guys speak and meeting people and, knowing that like there's also support, right? And there's opportunity to learn and be supported in this.
I think one reflection I have is more so around like the ecosystem around you and the friends, the family that keep you rooted and remind you who you are and who you can be. And I think that's important for me because as I heard you, TJ, speak about your mom, and I think you about your mom as well, and family and friends. As I've pivoted and will continue to pivot, I think that's one of the things that also grounds me, my family. I was actually undocumented for like 10 years of my life in the States. My parents picked up their bags, moved to Peru. They were in their 40s. I was 8 years old. And so when you think about pivot, it actually it's really ingrained in me, right? From a very, very, very beginning as a child. And I think when it comes to the workforce and, the professional setting, sometimes we might forget ourselves or get lost. But it is those around you that remind you, you've done this before, you can do it, and you can, keep growing, even if it feels scary. So I think that that idea of sacrificing, what you are for what you can be or who you are, what's true to you, is something that I'm taking, and the ecosystem around you, how they continue to be important and play a vital role, so that you feel confident in that next step.
So I thought thank you so much for this. This is a great panel today. And my most recent pivot was a forced pivot. So the company that I had founded, a private equity group bought it. And, there's a transition. And I kept warning them that the way they were going wasn't going to work. And so I got kicked out of my own company and kicked off the board. And they did fail. But in that process, being the founder, we had a 12-month lockup period. So my stock was locked up and they went belly up in under 12 months. So we had a complete wipeout. And in that process, I learned they could have taken all that away, but they didn't take away what made all of that. And that was a thing, like you talked about, having that ESPN card and being able to flash that. And I realized I was my community. I realized I was my culture. I realized I was the sum of my experience and knowledge and interest that made that. I built another company pretty quickly in a matter of months in the middle of COVID. And then I went and I bought that company back. And 2 weeks ago, HBO premiered a documentary about MoviePass, Movie Crash, and it shot up to number 2 most watched film on the platform. And I think if it wasn't for, like you talked about your mom, my mom was, baby, they didn't take away what made that. You go back and build it again. And it was that. It was like literally people at church was like, I'm praying for you. You got this. You're going to walk through this. You're going to, and somebody had me go back and read the book of Job. And they were like, go look at, that's the oldest book. Go look at everything he lost and look how, because he had faith, it got put back into him. And I had to remember that's the culture I came from. So, yeah.
Woo. I had to say woo because I was over here breathing. I'm like, it's getting to me. Really. First of all, I just want to say, wow, thank you guys for this. You have no idea how much I needed this conversation, and to just hear your experiences, and how much it validates my own. I say woo because this is a very loaded question for me. I am sitting in my pivot right now, and but there have been multiple along the way. Like you said, it's ingrained. There have been multiple, since the inception. Wow. My father is historically a substance abuser. As of this year, he's been clean. But I had to pivot from an early age, just to choose to not allow that to define me, to, not allow myself to I was never going to go there. You know, that was never an option, but to not allow it to stop any of the dreams that God, you know, put in my heart. But I will say most recently, because I'm from the Bay Area, so when you said that and you did it the opposite way, you said New York to the Bay. I did the Bay to New York. And like you said, you feel like it changed, you know, a little bit. Like I felt like some of my authenticity was, I'm always me, but I felt like I slowly started to fall into not showing the process anymore and, you know, trying to show that I'm, you know, already there just because everybody around me was already there, even sitting on the plane, trying to figure out what am I going to say when I get there? Because, you know, when people ask me, what do I do? What am I going to say? And then that's why surrender was so important to me, because I was like, you know what, I'm going to allow, I said, God, you speak through me. You know, speak through me when these questions are asked. So every time you guys are talking and I am actively listening and being here in this moment, I am also talking to God to say, guide my words and what I, you know, take away from this and how I translate what is going on. But what I will say is that I'm sitting in my pivot, my current pivot, because in 2020, I lost a very important friend to suicide. And unless you have experienced that, what I would say is that in them finding their peace, it leaves you searching for yours. And 2 months after that, I lost another very significant being. And then 2 months after that, when I came back from my birthday trip, because they had now opened up for you to travel, I found out that my person, my soulmate, which is my grandmother, had a tumor in her brain that had been growing for 20 years. That was not cancerous, but that was the size of a golf ball, so it was now blocking things. And by June, she was gone, and that left me in a space that I have never been in, because I've always been known as the strong one in the Bay Area. You really become desensitized to death and loss, because people are, in the first year of me moving to New York, I lost 11 people. So you become desensitized, and I did not recognize this person that could not bounce back, that felt like she was sitting stuck in the middle of traffic and everybody was passing me by, that no longer felt like, you know, fashion at that moment was important, and that, you know, it really put a magnifying glass on wanting to find purpose and, you know, where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? So it was a very interesting moment for me. And it's still a very interesting moment. But what I will say is that all of those things I am grateful for now, because they really pushed me into the person that I am today, which is a person, which, speaking to your point, I love, you know, showing. I feel like now the tug is to own a totally different space from fashion. So whereas it is heavily a part of me and it is who I am, and I will always be fashionable, I think that, you know, I am leaning into and feeling the tug on, it is time to speak up. I went to school for broadcast journalism and communications also, and I think it's time to use my space to talk about the journey, to tell the story. I'm a storyteller, through my words, through my content, and allow the fashion to just be what brings you in, you know, what reels you into the space. Like, well, she's, you know, but to have more to say. So, and that's very uncomfortable. And the weight, and really trying to understand what I'm going through in the weight has been hard. Like being still, he spoke about being still. That is hard. That is really hard when you do occupy certain spaces and you feel like now you have to take this step back and you don't know what to tell people anymore, that you do, where before you walked in a room and people knew what you did, So, but I will say that in that way, God has refined my vision. And so by sitting here with all of you guys and hearing people in a space that are very accomplished. And I just can't even believe I'm sitting here. This was not planned, to your point, by no means. Nobody could have told me I was going to be here at all. I didn't know about it. The same as you. And Lisa invited me and said, come. And I was like, you know what? Like literally 2 weeks ago, I was like, okay, I'm going to get the ticket. So this is completely divine. And to hear all of you guys' stories has fully inspired this next pivot and given me the confidence that I lost to move forward. So thank you to everybody sitting here.
Amazing. That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that. It's such an inspiring story. And we know you're going to be all right. For me, bless you. Sure. This thought just kind of tries to encapsulate a lot of what I've heard here today, and also how it reflects on my personal journey. But I really subscribe to the Buddhist teaching of the law of detachment, which is to not be tethered to anything outside of your control, to not be identified by others outside of you, even mama, even your family, even your community. And detachment doesn't mean that you don't care. And detachment doesn't mean that you're unemotional or you lost connection with things. But the law of detachment is to really embrace your true self, not who you think you are, but who you really are. And only you know that person. Only you know that side of yourself. And so, for me, it's always been a constant reminder to never believe your own bullshit, never to get caught up in your own hype, never get too attached to being something, because if that thing starts to pull away, you get frantic and start panicking. It's like, being in the ocean and floating on your back, and allowing the tide to take you where it takes you, as opposed to like trying to hold on to the side of the pool and then realizing that side of the pool actually doesn't even exist. So, for me, this has come through my life several times in several different ways, whether it's personally with people in my family and people that I love, or my community, or even in my career. I used to even now, I used to be, right? At one point I was employed, Spike Lee, I used to run his ad agency for 7 years. And for me, that was a full circle moment. It was serendipitous. He was my hero coming up. I studied film because of him. I got into advertising on that level of the game because of him. Originally, I was an artist. I still am an artist. But there was this, I started to kind of, as I progressed in my career, it was like climbing up the rungs of a ladder, and I felt like I only wanted to go up, and up was the only way I could go, and that slipping and losing any ground was akin to failure. But after working 7 years for a mentor or someone that you really looked up to and helped to find who you have become, where do you go from there? And how do you create this, how do you swing from one vine to another, seamlessly without losing any grip. And who am I going to be without that? Or who were you going to be if you lost ESPN or your connection to Elon Musk? And so much of that is based on ego and who you want to be and who you want to appear to be to others. And, it's just a constant reminder for myself and maybe to all of you to remind yourself of who the fuck you are. Reintroduce yourself to yourself on a regular basis. Never be defined by others. Never let yourself be defined by your ego. This is a journey of discovery that we're on. This is a journey of learning. This is not a competition. Because at the end of the day, when you're in that ground or you're in those ashes, you're just a culmination of your experiences and what you gave to other people. And so focusing on that and being able to understand that we're not here to do selfish things. We're here to give. And the whole key is to leave here giving more than you took. And so I just always try to keep myself grounded in that and intentionally reject attaching myself to things I have no control over or things that are defined outside of my truth. So just a reminder, y'all, be kind to yourself, love yourself, and give as much as you can to others, because it always comes back tenfold.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for your vulnerability. I really value the vulnerability of this space. And I think that was really facilitated by the vulnerability that you expressed and shared with us, TJ. I'm always learning from you, and I'm always learning from the people around me. So for us to be in this space where we could share with each other and encourage each other, as some of us shared, we are in the midst of our pivots, or there might be some unplanned that might pop up on us. Having this as fuel and as a tool is really critical. This is so powerful. We are over time and I do have to stop, but I do want to just ask one final question for you, TJ, just to leave us with. Sometimes when we're making choices in that moment, and we talked about it a little bit, you've had options. Some of you talked about your mom saying, make sure you always have options, right? There's something in us that might want to look back at shoulda, coulda, woulda, take another option. And I've noticed that about you, is that you really, really sit in where you are. So what has driven that, and what can we take from that? How do we make our pivots and our choices and stand in them without looking back or comparing?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it. It's just peace in knowing that you are where you're supposed to be, right? And to your point too about knowing who the fuck you are. Like we are one of one. We are unique. God made us so special. Nobody can do what you can do, what I can do. So I wake up each and every day with a peace in knowing that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. The uncertainty is in the journey, but I know that I'm supposed to be where I'm supposed to be. So I can sleep pretty well at night knowing that.
Thank you. And thank you all. I appreciate it. Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.